Martin's Cadillac had been sitting in the garage so long the dust on its hood looked like a second coat of paint. It was a beautiful machine, once deep green with chrome trim, but keeping it registered. Insured and maintained was an expense I no longer had the appetite for. At 74, I had to be practical. I told myself selling it would be just another step toward simplifying my life. Still, when I opened the driver's side door, the scent of old leather and the faintest trace of Martin's cologne came rushing out like a memory I hadn't invited. The glove box was the last thing to clean. I half expected to find only brittle insurance cards, worn maps, and maybe one of Martin's old pens. Instead, my fingers brushed against something hard, a small, cold shape wrapped in a crumpled gas station receipt. I pulled it out and found a tiny key with a metal tag stamped with a bank's logo. Behind it was a manila envelope, sealed. The words, "Do not open," written in Martin's neat, measured hand. I sat there for a moment, just staring at it. The envelope felt heavier than paper had any right to feel. My first thought was to leave it alone. But the flap was already torn at one corner, and that small imperfection pulled at me. I eased it open just enough to see what was inside. A single photograph slid into my hand. Daniel, my son, sitting at a desk beside a man in a dark suit. They were both leaning over a set of documents. Behind them, mounted on the wall, was a small metal plaque, Pinecrest Nursing Estates. My stomach tightened. That was the same senior facility Daniel had suggested, more than once. With a too bright smile and talk about making things easier for everyone, I'd laughed it off, telling him I was perfectly capable of living in my own home. But this meeting had happened years ago. I could tell from Martin's watch on Daniel's wrist. A piece Daniel only started wearing after Martin's heart attack, but before the cancer diagnosis. Martin had still been alive when my son was sitting in that office. The photograph trembled in my hand as I set the key beside it. The two objects now bound together in my mind like parts of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve. I closed the glove box slowly, my fingers brushing the cool chrome of the handle, and carried them into the house, straight to the kitchen table where the afternoon light fell across the wood in a sharp, cold line. The next morning, I set the small silver key on the passenger seat beside me and drove into town. The rain had let up, leaving the streets slick and shining under a pale sun. My hands stayed tight on the wheel the whole way, as if the key might burn a hole in my coat pocket if I didn't keep it close. The community bank stood at the corner of Main and Willow, the same brick building Martin had walked into every first Monday of the month. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old carpet. I'd known the manager, Mr. Crawley, for years, though not well enough to trade more than polite nods at church suppers. When I handed him the key and the tag, his brow furrowed. "This box is registered to Daniel Lowell," he said, glancing up quickly. "He's your son, yes," I replied evenly. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice before leading me to a small, dimly lit room in the back. "You'll have to sign here, Mrs. Lowell," he murmured, avoiding my eyes. The metal door swung open with a hollow clank. Inside the narrow box lay neat stacks of $100 bills, bound tightly with rubber bands. My fingers hovered over them, but it was the manila folder beneath that caught my breath. I slid it out and opened it on the small table. The top sheet was the property deed for my home, my name still printed cleanly, but with a recent transfer form clipped to it unsigned, but ready. Beneath it was the deed to Martin's old workshop on Mill Street. Both had sticky notes in Daniel's handwriting marking for transfer. And then I saw it. A will, notarized, stamped, but the signature at the bottom, My signature wasn't mine. The letters leaned too far to the right, the loop on the H too tight. It named Daniel as the sole heir to everything I owned. My pulse hammered in my ears. I closed the folder slowly, set it back in the box, and locked it with hands that no longer felt steady. When I stepped back into the damp air outside, I didn't head straight home. Instead, I turned the wheel toward the only person I trusted to see what I had just seen, on the drive to Robert's house. The road unspooled like a reel of memories I'd been trying not to watch. I thought about all the little comments Daniel had made over the years, the ones I'd brushed off as practical advice. Mom, you should consolidate your accounts. Less paperwork for you. Why don't we put the house in both our names? Just in case, it might be nice for you to have company all the time. Assisted living isn't what it used to be. At the time, I told myself he was being thoughtful, looking out for me. But sitting in that bank, staring at forged papers, those suggestions twisted into something else entirely. One memory in particular surfaced a conversation with my cousin Lillian at a family barbecue 2 summers ago. She'd pulled me aside, lowering her voice as if afraid the potato salad might overhear. "I'm sorry. Henrietta," she'd said, "I thought you knew. Daniel said you wanted to sell that half-acre your father left you near the lake. He had me sign as witness." I had stared at her, the laughter from the lawn games fading into static in my ears. "I never told him to sell it," I'd replied, the words tasting wrong in my mouth. Lillian had looked pained. "I assumed you'd agreed. He said you needed the money for home repairs. The check went to him. I thought you two had worked it out." I never confronted Daniel. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight over a small piece of land we rarely visited. I'd even convinced myself maybe he needed the money more than I did. But now, with the forged will still burned into my memory, I saw it differently. This wasn't a sudden change in him. It was a pattern. Quiet, careful, always cloaked in the language of helping. I turned onto Robert's Street, my hands gripping the wheel tighter. If Daniel could sell land without my permission back then, forge my name on a will now, what else had he been willing to do in the years between Robert Mays answered on the second ring? His voice carrying the same gravelly warmth I remembered from the days when he and Martin would sit on our porch, trading fishing stories until the fireflies came out. "Henrietta," he said, "it's been too long." "What's wrong?" I told him. Not everything, at once just enough to make his tone shift from casual to alert. The key, the envelope, the photograph of Daniel at Pinecrest Nursing Estates. There was a long pause on the other end. "Bring me a copy of that photo," he said. "I'll see what I can find." By the time I arrived, his small study was already lit with the glow of a desk lamp, papers and files stacked in careful disorder. He took the photo from me and studied it with the sharp, narrowing gaze I remembered from his days on the force. "That's not just some intake officer," he murmured, pointing at the man beside Daniel. "That's Charles Ellsworth. He runs Ellsworth and Pryor Realty." The name meant nothing to me. But Robert kept talking. "They've been sniffing around the county for years. Target older homeowners, usually those with no spouse, right before they're pushed into care homes. They offer a quick, voluntary sale, way under market value. Got a network of doctors, social workers, even family members in on it sometimes." I felt the room tilt, just slightly. Family members. He met my eyes. "The hardest cases to prosecute are when it's blood doing the persuading." I sat back, my fingers knotting together in my lap. The photo suddenly felt heavier in my mind. Not just a snapshot, but evidence of something moving quietly beneath my feet. Robert leaned forward. "If your son's talking to Ellsworth, it's not about making your life easier. He's setting the stage. Once you're in a place like Pinecrest, selling the house is the next logical step. And Ellsworth knows exactly how to make it look like your idea. I left Roberts with the photo back in my purse. My steps slow on his front walk. The rain had started again, thin and cold. And all I could think about was whether Daniel had already taken the first steps to hand my life over. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain kept tapping against the bedroom window, but it wasn't the sound that kept me awake. It was the image of Daniel at that desk with Ellsworth. The way Robert's voice had gone low when he said family members. By morning, I was back in the garage. The Cadillac sat in the half-light, smelling faintly of dust and oil. I slid into the driver's seat and opened the glove box again, this time determined to check every inch. The insurance papers and maps were still there. But when I ran my hand along the upper lip inside, my fingers caught on something rough. I leaned closer and saw a thin strip of black electrical tape pressed to the underside of the dashboard. It peeled away with a faint rip, revealing a small USB drive no bigger than my thumb. My chest tightened. Inside the house, I plugged it into Martin's old desktop computer. Folders appeared instantly, no password. No attempt to hide their contents. The first email thread made my stomach knot. Daniel Lowell to Ellsworth. Once the title transfer is executed, we can proceed before probate. No delays. She's agreed to sell the vehicle as well. Consider it part of the package. Another document was a scanned contract the Cadillac listed in neat print. The buyer identified as Ellsworth and Pryor Realty. The sale price insultingly low. My own name was typed neatly under the seller's line. The signature was a scrawl that only vaguely resembled mine. I sat back in the chair, the glow of the monitor turning the room a cold blue. Selling the car had never been my idea. Daniel had already lined up a buyer, folding it neatly into whatever deal he was building behind my back. I ejected the drive and set it on the desk, staring at it like it might sprout teeth. If the car was part of his plan, then it wasn't just a piece of history, it was leverage. And right now, it might be the only piece I had left to play. I called Daniel that afternoon, keeping my voice soft, almost apologetic. You were right. I told him, it's time to let go of the Cadillac. I don't need it sitting there gathering dust. I trust you to handle the sale. There was a pause, then a quick, warm tone in his voice. Glad you've come around. Mom, I'll take care of everything. You just relax. I smiled into the phone, letting a little shakiness slip into my words. I'm not as quick on my feet as I used to be. Best if you manage it. When we hung up, I dialed Robert. Within the hour, he was at my kitchen table, the USB drive between us. He'd brought a small laptop and a portable hard drive. We'll make 3 copies, he said. 1 for you, 1 for me, and 1 that goes straight to someone who knows how to lock this down tight. The someone was Margaret Hill, an attorney in Portland who'd handled a complicated trust for Robert's late sister. I'd met her once. Years ago, a sharp woman with a calm voice that could steady a room. Robert called her, explained just enough to get her attention, and by the next morning, we'd sent a courier with the USB copy to her office. Margaret's message back was simple. Don't confront him yet. If he's moving fast, he'll make mistakes. Let's catch them on record. So Robert and I agreed no direct moves. Not yet. We'd let Daniel think I was folding under the weight of age and sentiment. In the meantime, Robert sourced a small, motion-activated camera disguised as a wall clock. We'd place it in the garage, angled perfectly toward the Cadillac and its glove box. I practiced the roll slow movements, small sighs, letting him believe I was tired and ready to be helped. It felt strange, pretending to be weaker than I am, but the more I thought about that forged will and those contracts, the easier the act became. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for him to step into it. Robert came over the following afternoon with the camera tucked under his arm. It looked like an ordinary black-rimmed wall clock, the kind you'd hang above a workbench. But the lens was hidden neatly in the number 12. We mounted it on the wall across from the Cadillac, just high enough to capture anyone leaning into the glove box. I made sure the space looked untouched, no sign that I'd been in there since telling Daniel he could handle the sale. Then I waited. He showed up 2 days later, earlier than I'd expected. Pulling into the driveway with his usual confident swing of the wheel, I watched from the kitchen window as he let himself into the garage without knocking. On the small screen of Robert's tablet, the live feed from the clock camera flickered to life. Daniel walked straight to the Cadillac, opened the driver's side door, and slid in without hesitation. He popped the glove box, shuffled through the contents, and then leaned forward, reaching up under the dashboard when his hand came back. The USB was between his fingers. He glanced around the garage, then slipped it into his jacket pocket a moment later. He pulled out his phone. His voice carried just enough for the microphone to catch it. "Yeah, I've got it," he said, low and fast. "We're good to move ahead. She won't be in that house by next month." The words hit me like a sudden drop in temperature. There was no hesitation, no concern in his tone, just certainty. He ended the call, closed the glove box, and patted the dashboard like a man sealing a deal. Then he walked out, leaving the garage door ajar behind him. I sat back from the screen, my pulse loud in my ears. The plan wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about my home, my life. And the timeline had just been shortened. Robert looked at me, his expression grim. He's moving faster than we thought, which meant I would have to. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with Robert's laptop open. The garage footage paused on the frame where Daniel slipped the USB into his pocket. The audio file of his phone call was queued beside it, one by one. I attached the footage, the scanned contracts, and the forged will to an email addressed to Detective Harris at the county police department. A second email, identical in content, went to Melissa Carter, a journalist for the Oregon Sentinel whose work on financial scams against seniors had won her awards. I hit send on both before I could talk myself out of it. By the next afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Melissa's article had gone live online. Local realty firm under investigation for targeting seniors. Daniel's name was in the third paragraph, linked directly to property transfers and falsified documents. 2 hours later, the news stations had picked it up. I watched on the television as live footage showed officers in dark jackets leading Charles Ellsworth out of his office. Boxes of files carried behind him. Twist 5 came in a quick update from Melissa herself. The raid had uncovered dozens of fraudulent transfers, not just in our county, but across the state. The scale of it made my stomach turn. But it also solidified the case. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months began calling, offering sympathy, outrage, or both. Mrs. Henderson from across the street brought over a peach cobbler and whispered over the dish, "You always watch the quiet ones. I never trusted that son of yours." By evening, the gossip was running faster than the rain down the gutters. Robert called to say the police had all they needed and that Daniel wouldn't be able to talk his way out of this one. I stood at the kitchen counter, phone buzzing on the table, and looked out the window toward the darkening driveway. Somewhere out there, Daniel was watching the same news I was, putting together the pieces, and sooner or later, he'd know exactly who had handed them to the world. It was just past dusk when the front door slammed hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Daniel's voice came before I even saw him. "You've ruined my life," he spat, striding into the kitchen. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I set my teacup down, meeting his glare without flinching. I know exactly what I've done. He laughed bitterly. You've destroyed your own son. For what, some grudge, some twisted sense of pride? No, I said evenly. For the truth. And for the future of this family, what's left of it. His eyes narrowed. You think you've won because the cops came for Ellsworth, because the papers are talking about me. You'll regret this when you have nothing left. I stood, taking my time. That's where you're wrong, Daniel. The Cadillac, I sold it weeks ago. Not to Ellsworth, not to anyone you had lined up. A private collector paid in full. That money is already in a trust one with your daughter's name on it, not yours. He blinked, the words catching him off guard. The trust is locked. I continued, legally airtight. You can't touch it. Ever. It will be there for her when she's ready. No matter what happens to you. His mouth opened, then closed again, searching for ground he no longer had. You, he shook his head, almost in disbelief. You planned this from the start. No, I said softly. You did. Every move you made just showed me how to end it. The room was silent, except for the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, he turned toward the door, his shoulders tight, his steps heavy, when it closed behind him. The house seemed to exhale. I sat back down, lifted my teacup, and let the warmth settle in my hands. Daniel's accounts were frozen. His name was in every headline, and I still had one last thing to do before this was truly over. Several weeks later, I eased a modest new sedan down Main Street, the kind of reliable car that didn't turn heads but would carry my granddaughter and me wherever we needed to go. She sat beside me in the passenger seat, chattering about school projects and the cinnamon rolls she wanted to bake when we got home. The air had turned crisp, the heavy Oregon rains giving way to a clear blue sky streaked with thin clouds. Leaves in shades of amber and rust clung stubbornly to the trees, their colors bright against the pale light. As we passed the bakery, Mrs. Henderson waved from the sidewalk, and I lifted my hand in return. Others nodded or smiled, not with pity, but with something warmer recognition, maybe even respect. I'd learned something in those weeks. Age doesn't take away your power, it just changes the way you use it. I didn't win by shouting the loudest or striking the fastest. I won by waiting, by letting the truth take shape until it was undeniable. That's the kind of victory a long life teaches you to recognize. When we pulled into my driveway, Robert's truck was already there. He was leaning against the hood, reading something on his phone. Got news. He said as I stepped out, the state legislature is pushing a new elder financial protection bill. Stronger penalties, better safeguards. Your case was part of the committee's report. I felt the corner of my mouth lift. So it'll be harder for someone like Ellsworth or Daniel to try this again. Exactly, Robert said. They're calling it the Lowell Amendment. I let the words settle in the cool air, the sound of my granddaughter laughing as she ran up the front steps. The fight was over for me. But maybe this meant fewer battles for others. I glanced toward the street, the late sun casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. How many others, I wondered, would think twice before underestimating someone just because they were in their 70s?